What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you a non-spoiler review for Smile 2. So I really enjoyed the first Smile. It's actually one of my favorite horror movies of 2022. Probably one of my favorite horror movies of the 2020s, actually. I mean, there's not that many options to choose from, but in terms of my favorites, I would say Smile was up there. So I was definitely very excited for Smile 2. I like the concept. It's not the most original concept for a movie ever. There's definitely other movies that have similar ideas, you know, in the plot, but I do think the way they're able to tell this story within the first Smile was just fantastic, and a sequel made perfect sense. There's definitely more you can do with this, and I really like the idea they have for the sequel by making it starring a pop singer. I think there's so much you can do with that. And let's just get into the review, starting off with the positives, then we'll get to the negatives, and then we'll give it a rating out of 10. First things first, I do think making it in the setting that it is, within New York City, with, you know, this pop singer as the main character, she's, you know, obviously very famous in this universe, it is a really cool idea. I think it makes it very different than the first film, even though it's the same idea shown again in the second movie. It's now very different because you're using a very different type of character involved in it. And obviously she has all these fans coming up to her, and the movie touches on a lot about that industry and the different horrors within the industry itself. Like, it's not even just the actual like supernatural stuff in this movie. There's some stuff that happens in this movie that shows how difficult an industry like that could be for someone, how hard it could be for them mentally, physically, and all that. And I think they do a good job of presenting that. Naomi Scott is the main actress here, and she does an absolutely incredible job. I would go as far as to say one of the best horror performances I've seen in a couple years, to be honest. There's one scene in particular where she gives a scream that is like probably one of the most realistic screams I've heard. Like, she does a great job with that. And obviously the subject matter of this movie, she's going insane for most of it, right? So there's a lot of stuff that, you know, she's obviously able to show off her acting skills a lot more than a typical horror movie. You know, when you have a constant scenes of just absolute, you know, yelling and agony from one person, she's gonna have a lot of moments to shine, and she really does have a lot of those moments. But throughout the entire film, she was pretty consistently doing an amazing job in this role. I gotta mention Parker Finn's directing here, because of course he also directed the first film, and I always like when a director is able to make a sequel to their own film. Sometimes, you know, they do this thing with franchises where it'll be a completely new director that'll come in because the prior director didn't want to make a sequel, and then some other person had to get forced on the project. But you can tell ever since he made that first one, he wanted to do it again, just differently. And I think he was able to do a good job with it. And I just really like his directing style. There's a lot of cool things he does with the camera. He never makes it boring to watch. It's always very engaging. There's actually a couple of one-shot scenes in this movie. I believe there was two. One in particular was really awesome. It was towards the opening of the film. It was absolutely incredible. I'm a big fan of one shots. I think they always make a movie better if it's done right, and there was definitely a purpose to it, and I absolutely loved it. But even then, there's just a lot of cool shots in this movie that make you just, again, get more engaged in what's happening. And even some of the scares, some of the horror moments when you actually have like a jump scare or whatever it may be, there's always something with the camera that makes it more interesting, makes it more terrifying. It's very easy for modern horror movies to just be kind of bland visually. Yeah, I've seen so many that just, you know, there's just something so bland about the presentation of it, but not these movies. I feel like they've done a great job of doing something interesting as much as they possibly can. There's a lot of just fantastic cinematography here, fantastic shots. That is something I have to praise. I would say is one of the best things about these Smile movies. Honestly, if they do a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, he's now added to the list of directors that I would love to see directed. There's so many people on that list by now that I would love to see directed Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, but I'm adding Parker Finn to that list for sure. There are some solid scares here too, like some genuinely terrifying scenes. I just think the overall concept of just being completely out of control, seeing things that aren't actually there and having absolutely zero control over it, that is obviously going to be quite terrifying because it's something you really can't escape from. A slasher you could escape from technically. You know, even Freddy Krueger, as terrifying as he is, you could still hold it off because while you're not sleeping, you're not going to be actually dealing with him, even though you obviously have to sleep eventually. So that was kind of the scary part of those movies. But with this, it's like literally 24/7. There's not a single break that you get because when you're infected with this supernatural virus, there's nothing you can do. You are always going to be chased after by this demon. And I mean, for those of you who hadn't seen the first movie, that is basically the general concept of this movie, where there is a demon that is essentially going from person to person, and it gets to someone else after you witness the one person killing themselves. That's basically how the whole movie works. And they don't really add a lot onto that lore here, but I do think if you were someone who didn't see the first movie, you actually are able to watch this and still kind of understand what's going on just by paying attention to the story. And they kind of go over the story again, which might be kind of annoying for fans of the first one, because why do we need more exposition for something we already kind of know about? But I think it just works because if you haven't seen the first film, you could easily jump into this one and just understand things just fine. I also appreciate the amount of gore in this movie because, to be honest, it would have been so easy, and obviously they already did this for the first one, so I wasn't expecting them to do it for this one, but it would have been so easy to make this whole franchise a PG-13 horror franchise. They would probably make more money out of it. You'd have a lot more teenagers show up to the movie. I mean, these definitely seem like good movies for like teenagers in terms of like, you know, intro to horror type stuff, because I don't think they're like that far into the horror realm, but they're definitely, you know, they're definitely something I would expect a lot of high schoolers to watch. So they could have definitely made these PG-13 to get more people into the theaters, maybe a little bit more of an audience there. And they would have to cut back on the gore, the violence, the language, stuff like that. And I just think it would take away from some of the impact of these scenes, because seeing it is really what makes it work most of the time. Like, sometimes less is more is definitely an approach that works, but these scenes, a lot of them, I think getting to see it is what makes it as effective as it is. And there's a couple scenes in this movie where they go far with the gore, and like I said, I think that's what makes it more effective. And I'm glad they show it, and it looks good as well. It looks all really good. But now let's get to the negatives. Unfortunately, I do have a couple things to mention here. First of all, the ending kind of left a sour taste in my mouth, and I don't really think I can go into specifics here because obviously there will be spoilers, but I just feel like the way they wrapped things up here, I don't know. I like overall what happens, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But I don't like what it implied for scenes that happened before it, because it implies things for scenes that happened before it in a way that I personally wasn't a fan of, and I feel like took away some of the experience of the movie. And I think it's part of it worked, but other part of it didn't work. So I'm not like totally negative on it, but I think overall, just the immediate feeling I had when this happened, I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I like that, but I do like still what ends up happening in the end. It's, again, very vague because I don't want to spoil it, but that's just kind of the way I felt, which unfortunately is something I always also felt from the first movie. I feel like I didn't love the ending. It's weird how so many horror movies are so good until the ending. I don't understand why that is, but it happens a lot. And something I slightly mentioned before that I think could be considered a negative, I don't think I'm like hate it that much, but I definitely think a lot of people will come out of this movie with this being one of their main negatives, is that it really doesn't add much that the first movie didn't already do. Now, obviously, I think the way they utilize the pop star music industry aspects of it, that's all really cool. But in terms of like the actual story, the lore of this demon that is going from person to person, that isn't really added on whatsoever. Like, there's nothing new to it, really. You know, usually in like, let's say a franchise like Nightmare on Elm Street, there's obviously lore to how Freddy works, to how he works in your dreams. And some of the movies will add some new concepts. They'll change things up a little bit. They'll say, okay, there's this whole new thing that Freddy can do that he didn't do last movie. And it kind of just adds more to it. Or you learn something else about his backstory. There's usually more to it. You don't really learn anything in this movie, and that's not really a spoiler. I'm just warning you ahead of time. Like, you don't really learn that much that's new. So if you've seen the first one, it's not gonna suddenly give you a new perspective on this idea, or it's not gonna, like, there's not gonna be another piece to it that's like, oh my god, that's kind of interesting. There's not really anything new to it. It's kind of just the first movie with different characters. But I think that's okay. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it is something that I would have liked a little bit more being added to the lore, because I think that could have definitely added to the experience. And to be honest, I think they were going in that direction towards the end of the movie, but like I said, for my first negative, it didn't really work out that way. And the last negative I have, although I like the scares, I mentioned that before, I do think there were just a couple of pretty cheap jump scares in this movie. Unfortunately, I do think this does rely a lot on jump scares, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Some of the jump scares are good. I don't think jump scares are all bad. Some people say they're all bad and they should just not be in horror movies. I don't really agree with that. I think sometimes they're effective and they're good, but sometimes they do feel kind of cheap. Sometimes it feels kind of forced. It feels kind of thrown in there just to get the audience to jump. And if it feels like it's only there to get the audience to jump, then I usually don't like it. I want it to be there for the story's sake. I want it to be there for the characters' sake. Like, I want it to be something that works on the characters. Don't add it just to make the audience jump. I overall don't like when any movies do that, to be honest. Like, I don't like when they're doing things for the purpose of the audience to have some sort of, you know, reaction to it. I just do it for the story's sake first. If you want it secondarily to also affect the audience, that's fine. But like, it should be first and foremost for the characters. And I feel like there's a couple moments where you can tell they just did that because they wanted the audience to jump and have a whole screaming moment, which it definitely worked on me a lot, but sometimes it's a little cheap. All in all, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I thought it was a fantastic time, and I do think it was a solid sequel to the first movie. I would go as far as to say it might even be a little bit better than the first movie. I think they're like very close though. Like, I wouldn't say I like this a lot more than the first film, but I definitely do like it probably slightly more. Slightly more. Maybe, you know, if I watch the first one again someday, I'll probably like it more next time. I have no idea, but just right now, I would say I like the second one just a little bit more. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you guys on my next one. Peace out.